can't find nothing on the radio.
You ready, Steve?
Welcome to Songology. He's Bruce.
He's Richard.
And this is another episode from our Song of the Day archives.
Enjoy.
Welcome back, Bruce. We're still down at Muscle Shoals. What do we have?
Well, I couldn't leave Muscle Shoals without playing something from the guy who sort of made me aware of Muscle Shoals, and that would be Brother Bob Seger. Do you remember Bob Seger?
Oh, yeah.
Well, do you know he's a Detroit boy?
I think I did know that.
There you go.
He's been trying to do something to help revive some part of Detroit.
Indeed. Although that isn't the song that we're going to do today. Bob Seger's song Like a Rock was the only one that he ever licensed, and it was used by Chevrolet for years as sort of the commercial tune for their trucks.
Right.
And Seger did that because he wanted to help out the auto industry, being a Detroit boy. So, as I say, born in Detroit, he has an older brother, George, but it's just the four of them originally. Dad was a musician, band leader, so forth, but also worked in an auto plant to support wife and kids. But Dad left the family when Bob was 10. He took off for California, perhaps pursuing a bit of a musical dream that never really came to anything. So Bob and his older brother, his mom, were really strapped for cash. They moved into a one-room apartment, and brother George ended up losing basically a big chunk of his school because he had to work to kind of support the family. Bob would often in those years, nothing else to do and no money, got his enjoyment staying up late listening to radio stations and trying to pick up faraway radio stations on the old AM dial.
Yeah.
And that's where he got his introduction to Little Richard and Wilson Pickett, Otis Redding, and his favorite, James Brown. Bob Seger said that he loved James Brown more than the Beatles even.
Wow. Yeah.
So Bob was a good student in high school and was quite the track and field athlete. I'm given to understand he could run the mile in just a little over 5 minutes, which is probably about a third the time that it would take me, assuming that actually, it would probably take me even more than that because I'd have to stop to rest, particularly now.
Yeah.
I have to stop to rest for a while and so
forth. If it was only the running time, okay, yeah, it wouldn't be that long. But if you put in all the periods where we're sitting there gasping before we could run a few more feet.
And wheezing, yeah. The side of the track. Yeah, no, carry on, Bob. I'll catch up later. Yeah, Bob was quite athletic, quite the scholar and everything, until he really started getting into rock and roll. And then he would stay out late or sometimes all night with buddies of his. They would drive out into the country, circle the cars in some field somewhere and listen to music on the car radios and so forth. So he started his own band. And very quickly, they were playing 3 nights a week, different bars around the place. And most places he wasn't really supposed to be in because he would be too young. But he says that in 11th grade, his band played the junior prom. And the applause that they got at the junior prom, really, that changed his life. That was the thing that made it work for him. So he's just really started pouring himself into music. But for the longest time, he was never really accepted outside of very, very narrow markets. He was very big in Detroit. In fact, his records in Detroit in the late 60s, early 70s, he outsold the Beatles, but only in Detroit. And there was a few places elsewhere in Michigan and Florida, Pennsylvania, a couple places in the Midwestern states where, they knew Bob Seger and they would play his music, but just really had a heck of a time getting noticed. In fact, there was an occasion in the early 70s, he and the band drove for 25 hours to play a gig in Florida. They played 3 straight nights, turned around and drove 25 hours back because they couldn't afford motel rooms to stay. He says that, in those days I was more of a driver than I was a singer. And they say it was even weird into the late 70s because there was an incident in 76, the middle of 76. He played a Chicago bar. So he played in front of 50 people. That was the audience. And then 3 days later, he played a show at the Pontiac Silverdome just outside of Detroit where the Detroit Lions played.
Yeah.
In front of 76,000 people. Bit of a contrast there.
Yes.
So the Bob Seger song that I wanted to play, because it was recorded in Muscle Shoals, a favorite of mine from a long time back, is Mainstreet. Now, that was a #1 tune in Canada, and he wrote it about his high school years growing up in Ann Arbor, which basically is outlying in Detroit. The actual street that he sings about is not Main Street. It's actually Ann Street. But of course he changed it for the purposes of the song. So if you went to Ann Street, which is off of Main Street in Ann Arbor in the late 60s and early 70s, there were a lot of clubs. And in particular, there was a club that Bob used to go and hang around outside. He remembers that the house band was something called Washboard Willie. They were a blues band. And they had go-go dancers who danced in the window of the bar. And Bob would go and hang out outside because he was too young to get into the bar and listen to the music. And he was really quite influenced by all of that back in the day. So it's a kind of a neat song. It's about being an awkward kid and so forth and not really knowing quite what to do with yourself. And it features the Swampers. David Hood plays bass, Jimmy Johnson on rhythm guitar, Roger Hawkins on drums, Barry Beckett plays the piano part in this. The lead guitar, with a very distinctive lead guitar part, was a fellow by the name of Pete Carr. Now, interesting thing about this song was that when Seger came to Muscle Shoals, he'd hired a couple of guys who were contract producers for Atlantic Records, but there was some confusion about how everybody was going to get paid. The deal was that they were going to pay the producers so much money per side, and Seger thought that meant per side of the album, but in reality that means, per song, not per album side. They get into the studio and they start into this, but then suddenly this fact comes out. Well, we don't have enough money for these producers. And the producers immediately say, well, okay, if you can't pay us what you're supposed to pay us, we're out of here. And they leave. So, okay. So they're all sitting around the studio, and Seger says to the Alabama boys, well, gee, can you help us finish this record? We'll pay you. We'll give you a point on the production side and so forth. Would you do it for that? And the Swampers agreed to do that. So they got production royalties on all of the stuff that they did with Bob Seger, which turned out to be very lucrative for them. So let us take a trip with Bob Seger and the Swampers down to Main Street.
And as usual, I have to stop it right there due to the wonderful world of fair use rules. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe. You can visit us on Facebook or head over to our website, songology.ca. Now, here's your chance to listen to the music or go on to the next episode.